The night air thundered with the chopping blades of a Black Hawk helicopter as it descended onto the landing pad of the military hospital. The vibrations rattled the windows, shaking dust from the steel frames, while floodlights swept across the tarmac. Medics sprinted forward, gurneys ready, their boots slapping against the concrete. A voice rang out over the chaos. Incoming SEAL. Critical condition. Clear the path. The rear hatch burst open, and the sight inside was grim. A Navy SEAL lay motionless on the stretcher, his body broken and bloodied, camouflage torn and burned. His chest rose in shallow, uneven gasps, each breath a fight against death itself. Shrapnel was buried deep in his torso, jagged metal glinting under the harsh lights. Every movement sending blood seeping through the soaked bandages, wrapped in haste mid-flight. The paramedic shouting vitals was barely heard over the noise. BP crashing. Oxygen dropping. We're losing him. The urgency in his tone electrified the team. They surged forward, sliding the stretcher out with practiced speed, rushing toward the trauma bay. Inside the hospital's emergency wing, the environment shifted from chaotic to clinical precision. The double doors swung open as the gurney barreled in. Doctors and nurses swarmed like a storm, surrounding the patient in a coordinated frenzy. Commands fired rapidly. Clamp here. Get blood ready. Prep the OR. Every second mattered. The air itself seemed to hum with tension, with life and death hanging by a thread. At the center of the storm stood Dr. William Harlan, the hospital's chief trauma surgeon. Broad-shouldered with silver streaks cutting through his dark hair, he carried the presence of authority. Harlan was a veteran of countless operations, known for saving men pulled straight from the battlefield. His voice cut sharp, commanding respect without question. Move aside, this one's mine. As the medics relayed the extent of injuries, Harlan studied the SEAL with a critical gaze. His reputation as one of the finest trauma surgeons in the military left no room for doubt. Yet beneath his confidence lurked the challenge. Even he hesitated to admit this case was pushing the limits. Among the swarm of uniforms and white coats, one figure blended quietly into the background. A woman in plain scrubs, sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows, moved with deliberate calm. She was not loud, not commanding, but her presence had gravity. She adjusted the oxygen mask, secured an IV line with swift precision, and checked the monitors before anyone asked. Her motions weren't rushed. They were exact, as though she'd done them under fire before. But to the others, she was invisible. Just another nurse. One of the younger medics caught her eye, noticing the steady way she worked. Something about her didn't match the usual rhythm of hospital staff. There was a sharpness in her gaze, a soldier's steadiness in her posture. Yet before he could dwell on it, Dr. Harlan's voice snapped everyone's attention back. Pressure's unstable. We need him prepped for surgery now. The nurse stepped forward, already holding the equipment required, anticipating the call. For a brief second, Harlan's eyes flicked toward her. He didn't recognize her face new, perhaps, or from another wing. His jaw tightened. Who is she? He muttered to a nearby resident. Just a nurse, sir, came the hurried reply. Then keep her in her place, Harlan said sharply. I'll handle this. The words stung the air, though the nurse showed no reaction. She neither flinched nor frowned. She simply continued, her hands steady, her breathing calm. She didn't seem insulted. She seemed used to it. The SEAL groaned faintly, his body twitching against the restraints as another spasm of pain racked him. The nurse leaned down instinctively, her voice low but firm. Stay with us. You're not done yet. Breathe with me. Her tone was gentle, but carried a strength that seemed to reach through the haze of pain. DC Ailes' breathing steadied, just slightly, as though he trusted the sound of her voice. Harlan noticed, but said nothing. He was focused on the surgical preparation, already plotting the steps in his mind. Still, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. It wasn't the time or place for distractions, and he wouldn't allow any nurse, to interfere with his decisions. The trauma bay lights glared overhead, casting everything in harsh brightness. Monitors beeped frantically. 4 lines dripped crimson into the patient's veins, and sweat rolled down the brows of the medics working tirelessly. Yet amidst the frantic pace, the nurse moved like a ghost seen, but not acknowledged. Calm where others trembled, steady where others faltered. And then, for the first time, the surgeon noticed something peculiar. She wasn't just reacting, she was anticipating. She handed instruments before they were requested. She warned of vitals dropping seconds before the machines caught it. She adjusted pressure points as though she had studied this exact type of injury in battle, not textbooks. It was subtle, but undeniable. Harlan frowned. Nurses weren't trained like this. At least, not the ordinary kind. But there was no time to question it. "Let's move him to the OR," he barked. The team snapped into action, wheels squeaking against linoleum floors as the gurney was pushed down the hall. The echo of rushing footsteps and urgent voices filled the corridor. As the doors slammed shut behind them, a nurse walked silently at the SEAL's side, one hand resting on the edge of the stretcher. Her eyes never left him, not the machines, not the chaos, just him. It wasn't the look of a nurse merely doing her duty. It was the look of someone who had been there before, someone who had walked through gunfire, carried brothers from the battlefield, and refused to let another one die. The others didn't see it yet, but soon they would. The operating room buzzed with urgency, the fluorescent lights burning white overhead, throwing shadows across the sterile walls. The Navy SEAL lay unconscious on the table, his chest rising unevenly under the ventilator's rhythm. His body told the story of violent shrapnel lodged deep in his torso, burns scorched across his shoulder, blood soaking into the blue surgical drapes. Dr. William Harlan snapped his gloves into place with a practiced motion, his jaw tight, his mind calculating. He was used to hard cases, but this one carried danger in every step. The shrapnel wasn't just near the heart, it threatened to pierce the great vessels. One wrong move could end it all. "Scalpel," he ordered, his voice firm. The instrument was placed into his hand without hesitation. Around him, the surgical team moved quickly, almost mechanically. Years of training had hardened them against hesitation. Yet, in the corner of the room, the nurse quiet, steady watched every detail with unshakable focus. Her name tag read only M. Lewis. As the incision began, monitors wailed. The SEAL's blood pressure plummeted. "He's crashing," a resident shouted, panic leaking into her voice. "Stabilize him," Harlan barked. He reached deeper, sweat already forming at his temples. His hands were steady, but his mind knew how narrow the margin was. Every second wasted could tip the scale from survival to death. The nurse, standing at the opposite side, adjusted the foredrip with swift precision. "Increase fluids now," she instructed one of the medics. Her voice wasn't frantic, but commanding, carrying a tone that expected obedience. The medic obeyed instinctively, before realizing he'd moved on her order, not the surgeon's. Harlan's eyes flicked toward her. "Stay in your lane," he snapped. "You're only here to assist, not give orders." She didn't flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on the monitors. "His pressure won't hold unless you clamp before you. Cut deeper," she replied evenly, almost as though she were stating fact, not advice. The words hung in the air, sharp against the tense silence that followed. The younger medics shifted uneasily. The surgeon's face darkened, pride stiffening his spine. "I've been doing this for 30 years, he said coldly. "I don't need instruction from a nurse." But the nurse didn't back down. She simply folded her arms across her chest and repeated softly, "Clamp first." or you'll lose him." Harlan ignored her, choosing to continue. He was confident in his method. Yet as he advanced, the SEAL's vitals plummeted again. Alarms blared. The patient's skin turned pale beneath the bright lights, lips tinged with blue. "Damn it," Harlan muttered, his hands freezing mid-procedure. He felt the weight of indecision press against his chest. One wrong cut, and the man on the table would never open his eyes again. The nurse moved closer, breaking protocol, her eyes unblinking. "You're too deep," she said firmly. "If you advance another millimeter, you'll sever him. Clamp here now." She pointed with surgical clarity, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had stood in this exact moment before, not in a classroom, but in the chaos of war. The team hesitated. Their eyes darted between the surgeon and the nurse, caught between rank and instinct. The atmosphere grew electric, every second stretching into eternity. Harlan's pride screamed to dismiss her, to maintain control of his own operating room. But beneath his pride was doubt, a rare, gnawing feeling he hated, and that doubt whispered that she might be right. The SEAL's vitals spiked downward again. The flatline alarm threatened in sharp bursts. Without waiting for permission, the nurse leaned across the table, pressing a clamp into Harlan's hand. "Do it, now." The surgeon froze. His eyes locked onto her eyes that didn't waver, didn't plead. They commanded. Eyes that had seen this before, perhaps under worse conditions than any hospital could offer. For the briefest of moments, his hand trembled. Then instinct, or maybe trust, took over. He followed her directive, clamping exactly where she indicated. The monitor steadied. The SEAL's blood pressure climbed, oxygen stabilizing. The alarms quieted. A collective exhale swept through the room. The medics looked at each other in disbelief. Relief washed across their faces. The impossible had been turned around in an instant. Harlan stared at the monitor, then at his hands, and finally at her. His voice was low, almost grudging. "Lucky call," he said. But she shook her head. Not luck, experience. Her words carried weight, but she said no more. She returned to her position, calm, collected, as though nothing had happened. But the truth lingered in the minds of everyone present. This woman wasn't just a nurse. The surgery continued, each step more delicate than the last. Harlan worked with renewed caution, though now his eyes flickered toward her often, watching how she anticipated every move. She read the patient like an open book. When vitals dipped, she already knew the reason before anyone else. When the SEAL's breathing faltered, she adjusted the ventilator before the alarms blared. She wasn't following the operation, she was leading it in silence. And the more Harlan noticed, the more unsettled he became. His years of training, his medals, his pride, yet this woman, this nurse, seemed to move in a different league altogether. He didn't ask questions, not yet. Pride still held his tongue. But in the silence between orders, he caught the whispers of the medics. "Who is she?" one muttered. "She knew what to do before anyone else. She doesn't work like the others." Harlan clenched his jaw, focusing on the task before him. He couldn't afford distraction. But the truth was undeniable. Someone in his operating room carried knowledge that rivaled his own. And that someone wore plain scrubs, a simple name tag, and the title of nurse. The SEAL, unconscious, fought silently for his life as the battle inside the OR waged on not just against death, but between pride and truth, between arrogance and experience. And though no one dared say it aloud, the balance had shifted. The surgeon was no longer the only authority in the room. The trauma bay felt like a storm machine screaming, orders flying, boots pounding across the sterile floor. The Navy SEAL was at the center of it all, his life measured in rapid beeps and flickering red lines on monitors. Dr. William Harlan's voice cut through the noise. "Keep him stable. Prep for OR. His tone carried authority, heavy with the weight of experience. His team trusted him. He had saved men brought back from hell before. But beneath the intensity, one presence moved differently from the rest. Nurse M. Lewis. She didn't shout. She didn't scramble. She worked with quiet precision, like a soldier loading weapons before battle. Her hands tied off 4 lines swiftly, her eyes scanning vitals as if she could sense changes before the machines did. When one medic reached for the wrong syringe, she corrected him instantly, her words firm but calm. Not that his heart won't handle it. Push the dopamine first. The medic froze, then obeyed, realizing too late that she had caught a mistake even the attending physician had missed. Harlan noticed. He didn't like it. He leaned toward one of his residents. Who is she? Nurse Lewis, sir. She transferred from another base. Been here a few months. Harlan frowned. He had no memory of approving her placement on his trauma team. She worked like she'd been here for years, anticipating his every move, but there was something unsettling about the way she carried herself. Too steady. Too prepared. He returned his attention to the patient. Blood soaked through the gauze faster than they could replace it. We're losing time, he muttered. Let's move. Lewis was already at the head of the gurney, adjusting the oxygen mask. She leaned down, her voice steady but gentle. Stay with us, soldier. You've come too far to stop here. Her words were almost a whisper, but the SEAL stirred faintly, his chest rising with a deeper breath, as though her voice reached through the pain. One of the residents blinked in surprise. He responded. Coincidence, Harlan said sharply. Focus on the medicine. Lewis didn't argue. She didn't even look at him. She simply moved to the 4 lines, her eyes locked on the drops. But the younger medics noticed how she carried herself. She wasn't like the other nurses. She wasn't reacting, she was predicting. Her presence made them feel steadier, as if someone in the room already knew how this battle would end. That was when Harlan finally snapped. As she reached for another syringe, he stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His eyes narrowed behind his mask. Step back. You're only a nurse. Don't overstep your role. The words dropped like a stone into the silence. Several medics froze mid-motion, unsure how to react. Lewis paused, her hand still hovering near the tray. For a heartbeat, she seemed ready to speak. But instead, she simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Without argument, she stepped back. Harlan turned to his team. We don't need interference. I'll direct this. His pride was a shield, his tone making clear where the authority lay. But as the gurney began to roll toward the operating room, doubt flickered in more than one pair of eyes. They had seen it, the way she had predicted vitals before the alarms. The way she had corrected dangerous mistakes without hesitation. The way her calm voice had pulled a SEAL back from the edge of unconsciousness. Only a nurse? One medic whispered to another as they pushed the gurney. She's not like any nurse I've ever seen, the other replied. Lewis walked beside the gurney, silent, her hand resting lightly on the edge. She kept her eyes on the SEAL's face, her movements steady, her breathing calm. She didn't look at Harlan. She didn't need to. She had been dismissed before, underestimated before. It didn't matter. Her focus was on the man fighting for his life. The hallway echoed with the squeak of wheels and the pounding of boots. The OR doors loomed ahead. The medics pushed faster. Every second counted. Inside, Harlan prepared himself mentally for the coming procedure. He replayed the anatomy in his head, visualizing the path to the shrapnel. He was goddamn good. But the injuries were complex, and the margin for error was razor thin. Still, his confidence never wavered. He had built his career on never faltering, never doubting. And yet, As they transferred the seal onto the operating table, Harlan found his eyes drifting toward Lewis again. She was already at the monitors, calibrating them before the tech even arrived. She adjusted the ventilator, securing it with practiced ease. Every move was deliberate, smooth, confident. She didn't look like someone waiting for orders. She looked like someone who had given them. He clenched his jaw. No, she was only a nurse. And in his OR, he would not be undermined. The surgical lights flared overhead, bathing the room in white. The team assembled, instruments gleaming on the tray. Harlan took his place at the head of the operation, commanding the room with his presence. But in the corner, silent and steady, Lewis watched. Dismissed, yes. Ignored, yes. But not defeated. Because she knew something Harlan did not. This wasn't her first battlefield. And before the night was over, he would learn exactly who she was. The air in the operating room was suffocating. The sterile lights poured down like interrogation lamps, revealing every bead of sweat, every tremble of a gloved hand. Machines beeped, alarms wailed, and the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator carried the weight of a man's fragile grip on life. The SEAL's chest heaved against the restraints. His vitals plummeted again, numbers flashing red on the monitors. Each alarm screamed the same truth. He was slipping away. Pressures dropping fast. The anesthesiologist barked. Dr. William Harlan's hands froze mid-motion. His scalpel hovered above the wound, and for the first time in years, uncertainty flickered across his face. He was the commanding surgeon, the one everyone relied on in impossible situations. But tonight, the battlefield was winning. Get the crash cart ready, he ordered. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the crack in his confidence. Nurse Lewis stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. That incision will kill him. Clamp first. Reposition. Now. Her words rang with calm certainty. Not a suggestion. Not advice. A command. Harlan snapped his head toward her, fury flashing in his eyes. You do not give orders in my OR. His voice was a whip, sharp enough to silence even the monitors for a heartbeat. You are a nurse. Know your place. The room went still. The residents froze. The medics exchanged uneasy glances. Even the anesthesiologist hesitated. Everyone felt the storm brewing between surgeon and nurse, pride versus precision. But Lewis didn't back down. Her gaze was unwavering, her voice steady. If you make that cut, you'll bleed him out in seconds. Clamp here. Then reposition. She pointed, her hand steady as stone. Her calm against his rage was jarring. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't pleading. She was certain. Harlan's pride boiled. He had led hundreds of operations. He had medals, commendations, recognition. And here was a nurse, challenging his authority in front of his entire team. His jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He won't survive hesitation, Lewis pressed, her voice rising just enough to cut through the alarms. You know I'm right. You feel it. You see it. The SEAL's body convulsed, his vitals crashing further. The flatline warning began its merciless rhythm. V-fib. The anesthesiologist shouted. We're losing him now. The room erupted. One resident grabbed paddles. Another readied drugs. Chaos swirled. The SEAL's life hung by a single thread, snapping strand by strand. And in the center of the storm stood Lewis, unmoving. Her eyes were locked on Harlan, unshakable. Clamp, now. For the briefest moment, time fractured. Harlan felt the weight of two paths pressing down on him. One led through his pride, his refusal to yield, his authority maintained, but at the cost of the man on the table. The other path meant surrender, admitting that this nurse saw something he didn't, trusting her completely in front of everyone. His heart pounded. His mind screamed against it. But his gut knew. With a guttural growl, Harlan dropped the scalpel and grabbed the clamp. His hands moved with furious precision, locking down exactly where she had pointed. Click. The clamp bit down. The bleeding slowed instantly. The monitors screamed, then steadied. The line on the ECG flattened, then sparked back into rhythm. The S.E. Ailes' body jerked once, then settled. His blood pressure began to crawl upward. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone froze, their eyes darting between the monitors and the two figures at the table. Relief rippled across the room like a wave. The anesthesiologist let out a shaky breath. Vitals stabilizing, the residents exhaled. One even whispered, "Oh, thank God," but the air remained heavy. Because everyone knew what had just happened. The nurse had saved the patient, not the surgeon. Harlan's face was flushed beneath his mask, his chest rising with sharp, shallow breaths. He felt the weight of every eye in the room. Waiting, watching. His authority, his pride, his reputation, all of it teetered on the edge. He forced his voice steady. "Lucky call," he muttered, almost to himself. Lewis didn't look at him. She adjusted the foredrip, her hands calm, her expression unchanged. "Not luck," she said softly. "Experience." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. The teen exchanged glances. Nobody dared speak, but the thought was shared in every pair of eyes. This nurse wasn't what she seemed. The surgery pressed on. Harlan refocused, his hands steady again, but his mind wasn't. His thoughts spiraled. She had been right, absolutely right. Not a guess. Not a chance. She had known. The way she'd spoken, the way she'd pointed, it wasn't the voice of a nurse reading theory. It was the voice of someone who had done this before. Someone who had been here before. He risked a glance at her. She was calm, her eyes flicking between monitors and wound, always one step ahead. Every adjustment, every warning, she was already there before the alarm sounded. She worked like a second surgeon, or perhaps something more. The medics whispered behind their masks when they thought he couldn't hear. She knew before the doctor did. She's not just a nurse. She's done this before. Their whispers clawed at his pride, gnawed at his authority. He wanted to snap, to silence them. But deep down, he knew they were right. The breaking point had come not only for the SEAL, but for Harlan himself. For the first time in his career, he had been forced to surrender control. Not to another surgeon, not to a senior, but to a woman everyone dismissed as only a nurse. And as he worked, as he stitched and clamped and fought to keep the man alive, Harlan's thoughts circled the same unshakable truth. Who the hell was she? The room was heavy with silence, the kind that only follows chaos. The monitors no longer screamed, their steady rhythm filling the air with fragile reassurance. The SEAL lay motionless on the table, his chest rising and falling with the help of the ventilator. The worst had passed, but the tension remained, thick and unyielding. Dr. William Harlan finished the last suture, his hands still precise, though his mind churned with conflict. Sweat clung to his forehead beneath the surgical cap. He'd been in operating rooms for decades, but tonight had shaken something in him. It wasn't the blood, the risk, or even the near flatline. It was her. Nurse Lewis moved quietly, adjusting 4 lines, checking vitals, preparing medications without being asked. She wasn't shaken. If anything, she looked exactly as she had at the beginning, calm, composed, in control. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. As he tied off the last stitch, Harlan finally allowed himself to glance at her. She didn't meet his eyes, didn't look for acknowledgement. She wasn't waiting for his approval. She was already watching the SEAL, as though the entire surgery had been nothing more than one chapter in a story she already knew. Vitals stable, the anesthesiologist confirmed, relief dripping from every word. He's holding. The residents let out long, shaky breaths. The medics stepped back, tension easing from their shoulders. But nobody spoke to Lewis. Nobody thanked her. Nobody dared. They had all seen what she did, and yet none of them knew how to reconcile it. Then a sound broke the silence. It wasn't the beeping of machines. It wasn't the hiss of the ventilator. It was faint, raw, and impossibly human. The SEAL groaned. Every head turned. His eyelids fluttered, lashes trembling under the harsh light. His throat worked against the tube, a muffled noise escaping his lips. "Easy," the anesthesiologist whispered, adjusting the meds. "Don't push him too far." But the SEAL wasn't trying to fight. He was trying to speak. Through cracked lips, his voice rasped, so faint it was almost swallowed by the machines. "Lewis." The name drifted across the room like smoke. Nurse Lewis froze. She leaned closer, one gloved hand brushing lightly against the patient's shoulder. "I'm here," she said softly. The SEAL's lips parted again, his breath rattling. Each word was a battle, every syllable dragged from the edge of consciousness. But the determination in his voice carried further than the volume ever could. "You have no idea who she is." The words were directed at Harlan. The room froze. The surgeon's heart lurched in his chest. His eyes darted between the SEAL and the nurse, disbelief painted across his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The SEAL coughed weakly, his body trembling under the strain. The anesthesiologist moved to quiet him, but Lewis raised a hand gentle, yet commanding. "Let him speak." Her tone carried weight, not the voice of a nurse, but of someone used to giving orders. The anesthesiologist obeyed without question. The SEAL's eyes flickered open, clouded with pain, but locked with a warrior's intensity. He looked past everyone else and fixed directly on Harlan. "She's more than you'll ever know. She's the reason I'm still breathing." The words landed like thunder in the sterile room. Harlan felt his throat tighten. His pride screamed to push it aside, to dismiss it as delirium, but the conviction in the SEAL's broken voice cut deeper than any scalpel. He wanted to demand answers, to demand explanations. But all he could do was stare at her. Lewis didn't flinch. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes calm. She didn't bask in the praise. She didn't explain herself. She simply placed her hand lightly on the SEAL's arm, grounding him. "Save your strength," she murmured. "You'll need it later." But the damage was done. Every person in the room had heard it. The residents exchanged wide-eyed glances. The medics stood frozen. Even the anesthesiologist, usually unshakable, looked unsettled. The SEAL, one of the most elite warriors in the United States military, had spoken her name with reverence. Not as a nurse, not as an assistant, but as someone greater, someone vital. Harlan's hands clenched at his sides. His mind raced, grasping for explanations. Was she a decorated combat medic? A specialist brought in under the radar? Why hadn't he been told? But the deeper question clawed at him. Why hadn't he seen it sooner? The SEAL's whisper kept echoing in his head. "You have no idea who she is." The surgery concluded in silence. No one dared speak. No one dared question. The weight of the whisper lingered, heavier than blood, heavier than life and death. When the patient was finally stabilized, Harlan stepped back, tearing off his gloves. His hands were steady, but his heart was not. He looked at Lewis one last time. She didn't look back. She was already busy, charting vitals, directing medics, preparing the SEAL for transfer. Efficient, professional, almost ordinary, if not for the shadow of the words that hung over them all. Harlan left the room, but the whisper followed him into the hall, into the sterile emptiness of the hospital. It rattled in his skull, refusing to leave. You have no idea who she is. And for the first time in his career, Dr. William Harlan realized that he wasn't the smartest, the sharpest, or the most experienced person in the room. For the first time, he was afraid that he wasn't even close. The hospital at night had a different pulse. Gone was the constant rush of gurneys and the chatter of day shift staff. Instead, the corridors stretched long and empty, lined with the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional squeak of rubber saws. Shadows lengthened in every corner, and whispers seemed louder than words. Dr. William Harlan walked the hallway with heavy steps, his mind replaying the surgery again and again. He had performed countless operations, faced the razor-thin edge of life and death, but this one clung to him differently. Not because of the injury, not because of the danger, but because of her. You have no idea who she is. The SEA Lull's words rang like a bell in his skull, refusing to fade. He wanted answers, yet the more he thought, the more questions surfaced. Who was Nurse Lewis really? Why had she known exactly what to do when even he had faltered? Why had the patient spoken of her with such reverence? He found himself standing outside the recovery ward without realizing it. Through the small glass window, he could see the seal lying motionless, his body draped in wires and tubes. Machines beeped softly at his bedside. And there she was, Lewis, seated in a chair beside him. She wasn't charting. She wasn't adjusting machines. She was simply sitting there, still as stone, watching over him. It was the posture of a guardian, not a nurse. Harlan hesitated, his pride gnawing at him. He should walk away. He should let it go. But curiosity, no. Something deeper pulled him toward the door. He pushed it open. The room smelled of antiseptic and iron, faint traces of the battlefield still clinging to the man in the bed. Lewis glanced up briefly, acknowledging him with a nod, then returned her eyes to the patient. She didn't ask why he was there. She didn't offer explanation. Harlan cleared his throat, his voice low. You saved him. She didn't look away from the seal. We all saved him. Her words were measured, but he heard the deflection. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Don't insult my intelligence. You knew things tonight that no nurse should know. Techniques that aren't in any textbook. You didn't hesitate, you ordered me. Her gaze finally met his, steady and unflinching. Would you rather I had stayed silent? The question pierced him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She was right. His pride had nearly cost a man's life. He exhaled sharply, lowering his voice. Who are you? For the first time, her expression softened. A shadow crossed her eyes, a glimpse of something buried deep. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. You don't want that answer. His chest tightened. Try me. Before she could respond, the seal stirred. His eyelids fluttered, a groan slipping from his throat. Lewis was at his side instantly, her hand on his arm, her voice a whisper meant only for him. Easy. You're safe. The seal's lips cracked into the faintest hint of a smile. His gaze shifted weakly to Harlan. She always shows up, he rasped, voice raw. Harlan leaned forward. What do you mean? But the seal coughed, his body shaking against the strain. Lewis shot Harlan, a look sharp enough to cut. Not now. He needs rest. The surgeon clenched his fists, frustrated by the wall she put between him and the truth. But the authority in her voice left no room for argument. She wasn't merely protecting the patient, she was guarding something larger. Minutes stretched. The seal drifted back into sedation. The room settled into quiet again. Harlan broke it with a whisper. You've been in combat. Lewis didn't deny it. Her jaw tightened, her eyes flickering briefly with something paying, perhaps memory. Not all wounds bleed on the outside, doctor. The cryptic answer only fueled his curiosity. He studied her carefully, piecing together fragments. The precision in her commands, the certainty in her actions, the way the SEAL trusted her without question. She hadn't just seen combat. She had lived it. She had led in it. He took a step closer, lowering his voice further. You were one of them, weren't you? Special operations. Her silence spoke louder than confirmation. The tension stretched between them until finally she spoke, her voice soft but edged with steel. Titles don't matter. Ranks don't matter. All that matters is that he's alive tonight. But Harlan couldn't let go. His pride demanded understanding. His curiosity demanded truth. Why here? Why hide behind scrubs and a badge that says nurse? Someone like you doesn't just fade into hospitals. For the first time, her mask cracked. She looked at him fully, her eyes heavy with something that wasn't just strength, it was burden. Because sometimes, saving one life in silence means more than medals or recognition. Because some wars don't end when the battlefield does. Her words chilled him. There was history there, a story buried beneath layers of secrecy. He wanted to push further, but the way she looked at him, calm, firm, final, told him this was all she would give. The silence thickened again, broken only by the steady hum of machines. Harlan turned to leave, but just as he reached the door, the SEAL stirred again. His voice, weak but clear, drifted across the room. Doctor. Harlan stopped, glancing back. The SEAL's eyes cracked open, fixing on him. If you ever doubt her again, you'll regret it. Then his head sank back against the pillow, lost to sedation. The words carved themselves into Harlan's chest. He stepped out into the hall, his mind a storm. Pride told him to dismiss it. Logic told him to demand answers. But something deeper instinct told him that he had just brushed against a truth far larger than the walls of this hospital. And for the first time, he realized the battlefield wasn't behind them. It was right here, in these quiet halls, hidden in plain sight. Lewis wasn't only a nurse, she never had been. And Harlan wasn't sure he was ready to discover the rest. The next morning dawned with a pale gray light that seeped through the hospital windows, painting the corridors in muted tones. The night's chaos had faded, but its echoes remained. Every staff member who had been in the OR carried the memory like a weight they couldn't shake. Whispers had already spread. Not loud enough to reach the higher-ups, but enough to drift between nurses on break, medics in the halls, and residents over coffee. Everyone had seen it, how the nurse had commanded the room, how the surgeon had yielded, how the SEAL had spoken her name with reverence. She knew exactly what to do. She saved him when Harlan froze. She's not just a nurse. The rumor spread like wildfire, though nobody dared confront her directly. Nobody, that is, except Harlan. He hadn't slept. The words haunted him, gnawing at his pride, stirring his curiosity. He paced the staff lounge in the early hours, staring into the untouched cup of coffee in his hands. He told himself he wanted answers for the sake of the hospital, for protocol, for the chain of command. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted answers for himself. Who is she? When he finally left the lounge, he didn't go to his office. He went straight to the recovery ward. The SEAL slept under the gentle rhythm of machines, his body still fragile but alive. Beside him, Lewis sat again, her posture unchanging. Watching, guarding, she looked as if she had been there all night. You haven't moved, Harlan said, his voice more observation than accusation. She didn't look up. He's not out of danger yet. Harlan stepped closer, his shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. The entire hospital is talking about you. That made her glance at him, her expression unreadable. Let them talk. You're not going to deny it? He pressed. Deny what? That you're more than what your badge says. Her silence was louder than words. Before he could push further, the door opened. Two men in dark suits stepped inside, their presence immediately shifting the air. They weren't hospital staff. Their posture was military, their movements controlled. Their IDs flashed as quickly as they disappeared into pockets government issue. Dr. Harlan, one said briskly. A word. The surgeon stiffened. This is my patient. If this is about his condition. It's not, the man interrupted. His eyes flicked toward Lewis, then back to Harlan. Step outside. No, Harlan hesitated, glancing at her. She remained seated, calm, though he caught the faintest tightening of her jaw. Out in the hall, the taller of the two men lowered his voice. You performed surgery on a classified operative last night. His identity and the circumstances of his injury are not for discussion outside authorized channels. I'm aware of confidentiality, Harlan said, his irritation rising. But this isn't about him. It's about her. He jabbed a finger toward the closed door. That nurse. She gave orders in my OR. She knew things she shouldn't know. That seal your seal called her out like she was his superior officer. The two men exchanged a look. It was subtle, but Harlan didn't miss it. You don't need to concern yourself with Nurse Lewis, the shorter one said flatly. She is where she's supposed to be. That's not an answer, Harlan snapped. I nearly lost a man last night because I hesitated. She didn't. She knew exactly what to do. I deserve to know why. The taller man leaned in slightly, his tone dropping to something almost dangerous. What you deserve, doctor, is to keep doing your job. Patch up who we bring you. Leave the rest alone, Harlan bristled. You're telling me to ignore the fact that I was undermined in my own OR? The shorter one's gaze hardened. She didn't undermine you. She saved him. You should be thanking her, not questioning her. The words struck deeper than he expected. They were blunt, final. Yet behind them was something else acknowledgement. Harlan's pulse quickened. She's one of you, isn't she? Neither man answered. But their silence told him everything. Before he could press further, the door opened again. Lewis stood there, her expression cool but her eyes sharp. If you're finished, my patient needs quiet. The agents stiffened. For the first time, their professional masks slipped, just slightly. There was respect in the way they stepped aside for her. Not courtesy, respect. Harlan caught it instantly. The way hardened men in suitsmen, who carried authority like armor, yielded to a woman in scrubs. It hit him like a blow. Lewis didn't just belong to them. She outranked them. Back inside the ward, the air was heavy again. Harlan stood awkwardly by the bed, his thoughts spiraling. The seal stirred faintly, opening his eyes for a brief moment. His gaze moved between Lewis and Harlan, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She ever tell you? He whispered hoarsely. Harlan leaned forward. Tell me what? The seal's smile grew, though pain twisted his features. She trained us. And his eyes closed again, sinking back into exhaustion. The words detonated in Harlan's mind. Trained us. Not assisted. Not patched up. Trained them. The most elite warriors in the world trained by the woman everyone dismissed as only a nurse. Harlan staggered back, his chest tight, his breath unsteady. The truth was unmasking itself piece by piece, and it terrified him. Nurse Lewis No, whoever she truly was, wasn't just part of their world. She had built it. And for the first time, Harlan realized the battlefield didn't end with scalpels and sutures. It was walking the halls beside him, disguised in scrubs, hiding behind a title too small to contain her. The unmasking had begun, and there was no turning back. The sun had set by the time Dr. William Harlan returned to the recovery ward. The hospital corridors were dim, lit only by the muted glow of fluorescent bulbs. The day staff had gone home, replaced by the quieter, watchful night shift. But the whispers still followed him, shadows trailing in his wake. She trained us. Those 3 words from the seal had consumed his thoughts all day. He had played them over and over, each time finding new layers of meaning. The agent's silence, the respect in their body language, the way Lewis carried herself not as a nurse, not as an assistant, but as someone accustomed to authority, to life and death decisions. She wasn't just part of their world. She had shaped it. He pushed the door open quietly. The seal was awake this time, his face pale, his body fragile, but his eyes sharp. Lewis sat by his side, still in her scrubs, though her posture was anything but ordinary. She wasn't just tending to a patient. She was guarding him. Harlan cleared his throat softly. "How is he?" Lewis didn't look at him. "Alive, for now." The seal's cracked lips curled faintly. "Thanks to her," he rasped. Harlan stepped closer, folding his arms. "I keep hearing that." His eyes locked on Lewis. "But what I haven't heard is the truth." For the first time, she sighed, her shoulders lowering ever so slightly. "Doctor, no," Harlan cut in, his voice firmer than he intended. "You don't get to deflect this time. I nearly lost a man in my OR. I've been doing this for decades. And yet, you someone hidden behind a nurse's badge knew exactly what to do when I didn't. And now I hear you trained men like him?" He gestured at the seal. "You owe me an answer." The room fell silent. Machines beeped softly, filling the void. Lewis finally met his eyes. Her gaze was steady, heavy, the kind that weighed more than words. "You think you want the truth," she said slowly. "But the truth carries a price." The seal coughed weakly, drawing both their attention. "He deserves to know," he whispered, his voice raw but certain. "If he's going to keep saving us, he should know who's standing beside him." Lewis studied the wounded man for a long moment. Then she turned back to Harlan. "You want the truth, Doctor? Fine, but it doesn't leave this room." Harlan nodded once, his chest tight. She leaned back, her voice calm, almost clinical, but the weight behind it was undeniable. "I wasn't always a nurse. Before this, I was part of a program that doesn't officially exist. We trained operators for missions the world will never hear about. We taught them medicine when no surgeon was within 100 miles. Taught them how to stop bleeding in the dirt, how to cut shrapnel from their own brothers under fire. I didn't just assist them. I led them. I stood with them, and sometimes I carried them home." The words hung in the air like stone. Harlan's breath caught. The pieces locked together with brutal clarity, the precision in her commands, the calm in chaos, the reverence in the seal's voice. She hadn't been guessing in the OR. She had lived it, again and again, with real blood and real lives on the line. The seal smiled faintly, pride shining through his exhaustion. "We called her the Red Angel. Showed up in hell when we thought we were done. She taught us everything combat medicine, survival, the will to fight when the fight was already lost. Men like me. We're alive because of her." Harlan's throat tightened. Red Angel. He'd heard whispers of the name years ago, rumors in medical journals and military circles. A ghost story, they said. A battlefield medic who appeared when all hope was gone, who saved lives no surgeon could. Nobody believed she was real, but she was sitting right in front of him. Lewis's eyes softened for the first time. That was another life. I buried it when I came here. This hospital? It's the one place where I can save lives without burying the dead afterward. That's all I wanted. Harlan's pride crumbled in the silence that followed. He had spent his career demanding respect, building a name. And yet here was someone who had given everything, changed the very definition of survival, and asked for nothing in return, not medals, not recognition, not even truth. He lowered himself into the chair opposite her, his voice quieter than he'd meant. Why hide it? Why let people think you're just a nurse? Because being just a nurse means I can still save them, she said simply. No politics. No missions. Just people. Here, I don't need to be the Red Angel. I can just be Lewis. The SEAL chuckled weakly, shaking his head. Call her whatever you want, Doc. But when the next war spills into your OR, you'll be glad she's here. The room fell into stillness again. Harlan sat with the weight of revelation pressing on his chest. His pride had been stripped away, replaced by something heavier, something humbler, respect. He finally looked at her, truly looked at her. Not as a nurse, not as a rival, but as the quiet warrior she was. You saved him, he said softly. And you saved me too. From myself. Lewis didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes returned to the patient, steady and watchful, as if the battlefield was never far away. And for the first time, Dr. William Harlan understood the whisper that had haunted him. You have no idea who she is. Now he did, and he would never forget it.